Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof, bar my quick breaking news update for the 29th of June 2025. We're going to start with, we're going to talk about the Russian losses for the day before, as according to the General Staff, but just ahead of that, let me say that it was a record-breaking night for munitions sent into Ukraine, drones and missiles, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. We have 1,220 personnel lost. Now, interesting that there are some higher numbers, certainly in the personnel category, given that I know certainly in Kiev yesterday there were some really bad storms, trees uprooted, all sorts going on. And I'm wondering whether that would be the case along the front line. I don't know how far the weather went eastwards there. Because that would affect drone usage. You just wouldn't be able to fly drones in that kind of wind. And that would probably bring about a lower set of statistics, but I haven't really seen that. Actually, the personnel numbers have gone up. 6 tanks, 7 troop carrying AFVs, both below the daily average. A few more tanks than we have seen recently, but really relatively low numbers. 24 artillery systems, a snip above the daily average. 93 vehicles and fuel tanks under the 100 mark, and we see that as being a low number these days, but actually 93 is still, pretty decent. So interesting set of stats there. The personnel ticking up, it must mean something has happened that's marginally different. See 220 more people being taken out. Yes, I can't remember yesterday's numbers. Is around about 1,000, I think. But yeah, that has ticked up there, and it could be that there have been some strikes on troop accumulations, and we have seen that actually in terms of aviation hitting drone operators are still going on an awful lot, but also I think taking out command centers, and Dimko's Yukataringburg telling us that he's never seen more HIMARS being used than he has just now. So there's a lot of activity going on that no doubt is leading to personnel losses there. Now, sad news, and we'll talk about this in a little while. An F16 pilot was killed, and therefore a plane was lost as well in Russia's overnight attack. The plane was damaged as he was shooting down aerial targets. It's not the first time. In fact, that appears to have been what took down the first F-16, I think, if I'm correct in saying. Taking out aerial targets and then maybe shrapnel hitting the plane. Anyway, the plane lost altitude and crashed, and the pilot was lost. So that's a very sad news there. In the afternoon, yesterday, you could still see fire at the burning Kursk airfield. This is where 3 helicopters and a Panzer S1 were taken out in Crimea. The smoke was visible 20 kilometers away. So there were claims that fuel was hit. I think fuel tanks for jets were hit there, as well as other warehouses, possibly munitions for the aircraft. 3 helicopters too were taken out in that. So that has been burning. I don't know if it still is, but wasn't under control yesterday evening. Russian Air Force in the last day, so this was yesterday, had a very bad day. So remember, 4 what were they? The Su-24s were taken out, and then 3, I think they were. Let me just remind myself from the Su-34 fighter jets. So these are fighter bombers, Su-34s. So 4 of those were taken out at one air base in Volgograd, and then 3 helicopters taken out, as just mentioned, in Crimea. But of course, then the Ukrainians themselves had a bit of a challenging night last night, losing their own F-16, and that is going to hurt them a lot. Due to heavy losses, Russia is bringing old T62 tanks back into service. Ukraine's military intelligence reports on June the 27th, a train with 21 T62s was spotted heading west. Poor conditions, stored outdoors for years. The Kremlin is desperate, says Noel reports. In fact, Euromaidan Press has something to say on this. Russia is pulling tanks from the 1960s out of storage and sending them to fight in Ukraine amid mounting equipment losses, Ukraine's defense intelligence states. And of course, this kind of runs against the idea that they are stockpiling T-90M tanks in warehouses for some unknown reason. So I'm never quite sure what the accuracy of the production numbers of the Russians are. I do wonder. Russian forces now using Soviet-era T62 tanks that have been sitting outdoors for decades without maintenance, resulting in unsatisfactory technical condition. The intelligence agency reported that 21 of these tanks were shipped from Russia's eastern region to western regions on 27th of June. I don't know if that's within Russia to be updated, upgraded, or whether to be sent to the front lines as is, so on and so forth. So anyway, that is a data point to consider. Now, here we see a destruction of a building in the Belgorod region last night where Russian military personnel and ammunition were accumulating. I'm just including that as a kind of add that into what I was saying just earlier with troop accumulations being hit to maybe lead to 1,220 being a slightly higher number than we have seen previously. So there is just one example, this time in Belgorod. And it looks to me like a Mavic probably a Baba Yaga style drone. So I assume that's probably just over the border or not too far from the border, rather than that being a strike from, say, HIMARS or anything. That is a drone dropping ammunition. Then, of course, our obligatory reference to drone posts being hit. Here's a destruction of a UAV command post minus documentation, cache, FPV, drones, ammunition, technical equipment. So, when you have a destruction of these sorts of targets, there is lots of other stuff that's lost in there, and that'll be the same for both sides. So if you take out a command post, you've got the expertise, the people, if you're hitting it with the people inside, you've got the expertise that takes time to train these people up and the cost of training them up, etc., and the human cost. Then you've got documentation that's in there, maybe intelligence. You've got cache, FPV drones, the drones themselves, and all the equipment that goes with it. That technical equipment and ammunition and all sorts. And so these can be pretty bad losses for the immediate areas for either side if they lose such a target. Right, this is an example of the terrors of FPV drones. I remember watching zombie films. I think they featured this in Zombieland, the film where I know I've written a book. I've written a couple of books actually on this. Here's my chance to spam you. So if you want a fiction read for the summer, you can get Johnny Pierce, Survival of the Fittest Metamorphosis and Survival of the Fittest Adaptation. They talk you through a pandemic that rips through and turns people crazy and whatnot, and then you have all the moral dilemmas involved in that. But one of the things I've always wondered is, if you're caught doing a number two, like in a zombie attack, what do you do? How do you navigate all that? And that features in Zombieland. And here we have it in the reality of drone warfare. We have a Russian caught doing a number two in an outhouse, and a drone hitting them, and it doesn't end well for them. So anyway, that is maybe everyone's nightmare of being taken out there while otherwise incapacitated. And you can go and watch these in full at your leisure. I don't want to get restricted when I show you too much. Sumy front looks a lot more stable now, says Noel reports. My sources there say Russian comms are full of complaints. Their guys across the border are totally exhausted. The video here is from Krasnok by Yabrskoye. Anyway, that word, where Russians are seen caring about their own, and this is not a one-off, I can tell you that. So we have two Russians beating up another Russian, just caught on drone. They're just checking it out, and there's just people are not happy. Morale is low, taking out on each other. Issues with command, issues with refuseniks and deserters and all sorts. So anyway, interesting that Sumy seems to be in a better place for the Ukrainians, but elsewhere on the front line, of course, there are real challenges. Now, talking about the horrors of drones, here is a vehicle, a Ukrainian vehicle, being chased by a Russian FPV drone, and it being struck actually, but carrying on. This is carrying Ukrainian soldiers near the Prokhorovsk direction, and you can bet your bottom dollar that any kind of evacuation, any kind of movement in vehicles, it's got to be done bloody fast. I mean, this vehicle is driving at a rate of knots. Keeps looking in his rearview mirror. Watch the sky, says the someone else in the vehicle. And then, you know, that is driving pretty quickly. These drones, therefore, you can imagine, say next turn, these drones can drive really quickly. Oh, there you go. Intact, go faster, let's go. So I don't know whether that has caused any death or injury to people in the back, but you could hear the explosion there. He says we're intact. Keep going, next left turn. Wow. And that was traveling at a pretty high speed. So those drones, they can outpace your fast-moving vehicles. Now, Dimko's Luktenko, as I mentioned in the past week, he says, I've witnessed more HIMARS in action than ever before in my life. This is good, I guess. Now, he is a reconnaissance drone pilot, part of the team there, that flies these drones, acquires the targets, and then calls in things like HIMARS or whatever is available to take out the targets. He's saying that I've just seen more HIMARS than I ever have in my life. So that is good news to Ukrainians. I mean, you could say it's worrying because they're having to call in HIMARS to hit more stuff, maybe. But there were also claims that Dimko himself saying we need HIMARS rockets. And then actually within a week, he's saying I'm seeing more HIMARS than I've ever seen. So I think I would interpret that as good news for the Ukrainians. Russian summer offensive in Ukraine is faltering just weeks after it began, despite a record number of attacks across multiple fronts, according to the Daily Telegraph. The sheer volume of assaults has not translated into meaningful breakthroughs on the battlefield, and that's most notable possibly up in Sumy, although Prokhorovsk and Donetsk and Konstantinivka direction, it's possibly a different story. So Visioner here breaks that down. Russia's summer offensive has failed, writes the Telegraph. The article notes that along the front line stretching from Sumy to Kharkiv regions to Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk, Russia's offensive developed faster in May than it had in April. However, by June, due to Ukraine's successful defensive operations, the pace of Russian assaults has significantly slowed. Following months of maximum territorial gains, the momentum has visibly dissipated, accompanied by substantial losses in both manpower and armoured vehicles. That's good news. Also could come down to better fortifications being built. There have been reports that when the Russians have met the proper fortifications, they have come a cropper to some degree. The big vehicle ditches, concertina wire, causing a problem as well. Chris Owicki has a thread on manpower shortages, meaning that Russia is sending scarce aerospace specialists, not the first time we've heard this, such as aircraft and mechanics, to fight in frontline infantry. However, these space marines, as they are sarcastically termed by the Russians, are even more poorly supplied than usual. The commentary by the Fighter Bomber Telegram channel highlights a problem that the Space Marines are facing because they are not associated with particular regions. They have difficulties accessing the humanitarian aid that most army units depend on. Explanations have arrived as to why the VKS Space Marines were left out in the cold in terms of humanitarian aid and on a residual principle with support from the Ministry of Defence. Regions help their units based on the principle of regional affiliation, and the VKS infantry units are staffed based on the principle of secondment. They take an aircraft mechanic and send him on a mission as a rifleman grenade launcher to the trenches. That is, such units do not have permanent deployment, and at the end of the air defence they will disappear because all the infantrymen will return to their planes and helicopters. They do not have their own region or city. They are from all over Russia. They flew by with the wave of universal aid, and now when hard times come with aid, they are again thrown overboard. They are called a motorized rifle battalion, regiment, company, platoon of the VKS under different numbers. Well, almost everywhere the numbers are 1, 2, 3. And as a bonus, they're not only infantrymen, but also artillerymen. That is, they also have a howitzer division of the VKS, and now they almost have a tank, so on and so forth. So it then gets explained further and further. But it just shows the personnel issues that the Russians are having. Just trying to see if there's any kind of, in short, nothing works or no. Yeah. So yeah, it's just more woes for the Russians in terms of generating enough troops for infantry assaults, and again having to draw from other specialists who you would think would be better placed to do their specialism rather than being thrown at the Ukrainians with a gun in their hands. Now, this is an absolutely spectacular video here. I showed you a video to motorcycle. Well, first of all, I showed you a motorcyclist being, clapped on the back as a couple of people are saying thank you for generating the funds to get this motorcycle and thanking their humanitarian aid sponsors, these Russians. And then the motorcyclist promptly then drove into a bush. Just literally drove off, lost control straight away, drove into sort of a tree bush thing. And that was pretty funny. Then we had two Russian motorcyclists crashing into each other as they were being filmed. And now we have this. This is just, I mean, you could imagine this in a motorbike show. But here we go. He says, F guys, I didn't effing see it you. So that's going to have hurt. But my goodness, what a lucky man. Like, let's have a look at that. Head-on collision, and the guy does a flip. You can see the motorcycle there. Bang. Does a flip. And due to the nature of that buggy and its open kind of top and a couple of bars, he actually probably survives better. He's going to be hurting in the morning, that's for sure. Does a flip over and then lands. Oh, just incredible. That's just incredible. Anyway, onto the strikes here. We have the Ukrainians have borne witness to what is arguably the biggest night of attacks. So it's not the most drones by 2. There was 479 sent previously the other week. And it's not the most missiles by quite some margin. But together, I think it might be the highest number of munitions thrown into Ukrainian airspace. 477 drones, of which 436 were taken out. I think that's 92% interception rate. That's not bad. And then there are a load of missiles sent. So 41 Iskander-K cruise missiles, or KH-101, of which 33 were intercepted. So that's pretty good. 0 out of 4 Kinzhal hypersonic dagger missiles were taken out. So a complete success for them in terms of evading interception. And then Iskander-M or KN-23 ballistic missiles, 1 out of 7 were taken out. So the ballistics got through. And in fact, we can add 0 out of 3 S-300 surface-to-air missiles used in their ground attack mode also being intercepted. So 0% on both the Kinzhals and the S-300s, and a very low percentage interception rate on the Iskander-M. So it depends where these were sent as ballistic missiles as to how likely they are to be shot down, because most of your best your Patriot PAC-3 is going to be around Kiev, probably around the Staro-Konstantinov Air Base in Khmelnytsky. But if they're sent to other places, then they're much less likely to get shot down. And then 4 out of 5 caliber cruise missiles shot down. So much better success on the cruise missiles, not so good on the ballistic missiles. 249 drones were intercepted conventionally, 226 by electronic warfare. Okay, so Russia massively attacked Ukraine at night with drones, calibers, Kinzhals, ballistics, and cruise missiles. More than 450 drones, 440 missiles, actually 477 drones. So yeah, I haven't seen a massive amount of footage yet. A lot of drones still did get through, of course. You've still got 41 drones getting through. So even though the percentage in interception rate was excellent, all things considered, 92%, 91. So you got about 8-9% of the drones getting through. That's pretty good. But when you're sending 477, that's a smaller percentage of a massive number, meaning 41 drones got through at night, and that will have caused all sorts of damage. And one thinks that given if we go to the map here, given that a vast number were sent at Lviv they probably were targeting military or military industrial complex sites, and you're not going to see an awful lot of footage of that. So when the Russians are successful in their strikes, you generally don't hear about it too much because the OPSEC is pretty good and you don't get footage of the military targets that were taken out. You often get footage of the civilian infrastructure that was hit, both for PR reasons and also is you don't get into as much trouble for spreading that because it works to kind of show the horrors of what Russia is doing, I guess. So I did a video last night on Ukrainian refugees, and I don't know whether the Russians watch that and say, you think the refugees can live in safety around Ukraine? Well, we're going to do one of the biggest attacks on Ukraine. So it's as if it's to spite me and to disprove my point. It would be interesting to know, because this looks horrific, but of course what they're all doing is aiming for very particular places where, I know we're often quick to say they're aiming at civilians. I don't think that's largely the case. I think that can be the case, but quite often it is aiming for legitimate targets. But when those targets are near civilian infrastructure, then you send them off course, or you hit them with both electronic warfare and jamming and also conventional means, send them off course. These things are going to very often end up blowing up in civilian areas. But yeah, so there are a couple of places that were really heavily targeted. Lviv and close to Lviv, there looks to be some kind of, I guess, military target southwest of Lviv. You've got Mykolaiv, you've got a little bit in Dnipro. Kiev actually wasn't largely targeted last night, according to this map at least. You have these ballistic missiles thrown at Mykolaiv and then others thrown in the middle here. I can't quite work that out, whether it's Poltava or somewhere, but certainly this place is one of the most heavily targeted, and then Lviv as well. So Kiev Metro, there were still people hiding in the metro, as you would expect, but Kiev actually got away with it, far more easily compared to somewhere like Lviv. So what are the Poltava. So injuries in Cherkasy, Ivano-Frankivsk, civilian infrastructure damage in Sumy, Dnipro, Poltava, Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv, and Lviv. Targets included homes, colleges, church, and critical infrastructure. I assume quite a lot of military infrastructure as well. Here is one of the Black Shaheeds down in downtown Lviv. I think I recognise exactly where that is. I think I've driven around those cobbled streets there. So yeah, there are the trajectories. As you can see here, the stats up there in the colour. The colour of those different missiles, but I think you can broadly guess. So orange and blue being ballistic missiles there. Right, it doesn't include the S-300s. Likelihood for the S-300s, they're probably sent from the northern border into someone like Kharkiv or Sumy, would be my guess. So Ben Hodges makes this statement: if Russia makes a terrible decision to attack a NATO country, they will have already made the decision to launch these sorts of aerial attacks against our cities and transportation infrastructure. Either help Ukraine defeat Russia, or start spending billions on air defense. You spend billions on Ukraine or billions on air defense of your own cities and then have to deal with it. Well, better to deal with it in Ukraine. As Fabian Hoffman agrees, European leaders need to understand that this is their fate as well, unless Europe gets smarter about missile defense or more serious about deterring Russia, including by deploying a credible counter-strike capability. In the present situation, oversaturation of European missile defenses is virtually guaranteed within days or at best weeks of a war with Russia. If that happened, you can guarantee though that our aviation would be working super hard to take out their capabilities of sending those missiles. But yeah, as far as defensive capabilities are concerned, we've probably got a long way to go. So best spend that money helping Ukraine defend themselves against Russia. So 537 missiles and drones launched at Ukraine. Poland flew defensive patrols until 6 a.m. in the morning. There are a couple, if you look, that went into Moldova by the looks of it. Is that, or yeah, so into Moldova. So I don't know what happened with them and whether Romanian planes were in the air as well. Ukrainian pilot Utsimenko paid with his life, defending against the barrage that NATO allies watched from across the border. So that is super sad. What do we have? Mum of fallen F16 pilot Juice, so a previous famous Ukrainian pilot who died sadly, shared a photo of Maxim Ustimenko killed tonight. Max, a guy of steel, she said, always striving to be the best at defending Ukraine. Super intellect, great IT guy, big wings, big responsibility, big dedication. Together with Andriy since the first year, together forever in the sky. Some really sad news there for those no doubt tight-knit Ukrainian pilots. And just a real hit to their capacity and capabilities as well. They don't have endless numbers of F-16s. Russia sent all of those munitions in, and also S-300s. Anton Gerashenko lays out where a lot of damage was done. So Cherkasy, 6 people injured, including 1 child, 3 9-story apartment buildings and a local college were damaged. Mykolaiv, an infrastructure facility, was hit. Warehouse buildings were damaged. Ivano-Frankivsk region, debris from downed targets fell on private properties in Rohatin and Bilitsvi villages. In the village of Vasyuchin, windows of a church building and part of a wooden bell tower were damaged. In the village of Naraivka, a woman was injured and residential building was damaged. Sumy region, Shostka and Konotop districts and Sumy were affected. Civilian infrastructure was damaged and destroyed. Dnipropetrovsk, Russia attacked Nikopol, Mahanets and Pokrov communities. In the morning, drones struck the district center. Poltava region, a Kremenchuk district was hit. In the Poltava district, a business was affected and an extension of a residential building was damaged. Zaporizhia production facility of one of the enterprises was damaged. And Lviv, Russian targeted critical infrastructure. And of course, I think where the Russians have the most success, you have the least detail. So Lviv, Russia targeted critical infrastructure is all that's said there by Anton Gerashenko. And yet you had all of that going at Lviv and nearby. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happened, or possibly never find out exactly what was hit. Certainly not during this part of the war. And, you know, here's just, I know this is pretty horrific, but just sometimes I think we need to understand what these strikes mean. While Europeans enjoy Swedish meatballs in IKEA cafe and cozy nights in the home with Netflix, says Jay in Kiev, here's what Ukrainians are dealing with to ensure those Europeans can continue having those things. So a very pointed comment there from Jay in Kiev, and that's a pretty horrific photo. Now, last night there was evidence of Grands and Shahids being shot down. I thought this was an interesting one with tracer fire taking out the Shahid there. I wonder, you know, how much those bursts cost in terms of, I don't know what's firing those, whether that's coming from a Shahed or something, and each one of these is like $500 to $600, maybe even more, and you know, like throwing it all in the sky to take out these Shahed drones. It's just a very costly affair, isn't it? And then it's costly in human lives and infrastructure. Here's a Mi-8 shooting down a drone. We're seeing helicopters used quite a bit, but there are claims that there just aren't enough of them. These are quite effective ways of taking out the Shahids, particularly in the daytime when you see them in the daytime. I don't know how that was taken out. It may have been through firing at it. Could have been through electronic warfare. I don't know, but that's a Shahid taken out there by that helicopter. I guess they have to work really hard on making sure that they take them out over fields rather than over any kind of civilian infrastructure. Now, here's a video that's emerged showing Russian Iskander ballistic missile striking a school building in the Odessa region just days ago. So Odessa was really hard hit a few days back. Strike also injured a dozen people, including teenagers there. So Odessa's been under intense focus off and on for quite some time, but that is one heck of an explosion there. Ballistic missile, and if that's all true, that it's a Russian ballistic hitting a school building, and you know why are they doing that? What's going on there? That's horrific. Now, ammunition depots have been hit in the Bryansk region. There have been a number of strikes over the last 48 hours. You know, I've mentioned the air base, well, 2 air bases that were hit, one in Crimea, one in Belgorod. That's been a really good haul for the Ukrainians. The Russians have hurt there. But also there have been these ammunition depots that have had quite a bit of attention given. Here's one in Bryansk that I reported. It's the 1060th Logistics Center located in Bryansk, and that was burning for some time. And you know, there's one that caught fire much further to the east. Might have been a wildfire that got as far, or that itself could be sabotaged, got as far as the ammunition depot in Chchen, and that was burning for days, and that was all sorts of a problem there. And there've just been a number of I think successful moments for the Ukrainians over the last few days, despite how difficult last night undoubtedly was. Now, I showed you the substation that was on fire in Belgorod the other day, yesterday morning I think it was, and now we have the FPV footage showing the drone striking into the substation there, so now we know exactly what hit it. And I don't know if there's anything else to add. No, that's still talking about the ammunition depot that I've just reported on. Okay. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces now. So a huge scandal has erupted as Azerbaijan demands answers after at least 2 of its citizens are suspected of dying while being tortured by Russian cops. Ziadin and Hussein Safarov are known to have died. Many others have clear signs of beatings. One report says 5 died in custody. It follows mass raids in Yukataringburg targeting immigrants, with at least 50 being detained. Those arrested at home or work were told to sign up and go to fight for Russia in Ukraine. It shows the pressure on regions to recruit fresh meat. So again, more stories of the Russians needing boots on the ground and going around to different places and rounding up immigrants. It seems to be one of their preferred options. It's not so easy for these people to complain, even for their countries to know about them being sort of rounded up and sent to the front lines. You know, there are stories of immigrants being hoodwinked into signing up, signing contracts that they think are for employment or something, and they end up being contracts for fighting on the front line. And then you just get people that are just forcibly rounded up, it appears. Illegal immigrants and also legal ones. And then issues with paperwork. Oh, you've got an issue with your paperwork here. All right, we're going to send you to the front line. Now, so that's Azerbaijan complaining about what's going on with the Azerbaijanis there in Yukataringburg. But we also had this situation, and I almost showed this to you yesterday morning, but decided not to. Because I was like, well, this sort of thing happens quite often. We have Chechens having an issue with police. So the police stopped Chechens for driving without number plates, I think they were, and maybe speeding. So the police stopped these Chechens who are fighting, I think, fighting on behalf of the Russians or with the Russians. And then this turned into the Chechen soldiers basically beating up the police. And you get... Don't surround me, let's talk normally. And they're all like hassling him, and then they start beating him up, and then he runs back to his police cars. There's a couple of police cars there. So anyway, this has caused quite a lot of consternation for the Russians. They're like, what the hell are these Chechens doing, beating up our policemen, and yada yada. And then you have Alepti Alaudanov, who's in charge of the Akhmat battalion, who sorry, my partner's speaking to me through the window, who then has to answer for this. So after Chechen fighters roughed up Russian military police, Zebloggers piled on Apti Alaudanov, demanding answers, but the TikTok commander shrugged it off, saying the guy wasn't from his unit and basically not his problem. And so it's a pretty unresolved situation. I'm going to show you something from this chat. You see that? Okay, see it? You see it here? Right, that image has caused people to go a little bit nuts. So this is the guy in charge of the Chechen forces, the Akhmat forces, who are helping the Russians. And someone's actually looked at that watch and gone, That watch he's inadvertently showed off in the video appears to be a Baudelaire Observatoire 1872, worth €270,000. Being a commander of Akhmat certainly pays off. Just gives you an indication of the absolute corruption, I think, that must be going on with these commanders and whatnot. If you can afford a €270,000 watch for being a commander in the armed forces, then I think something's amiss there. Right, what else do we have? So here's an incredible bit of footage to show a Ukrainian farmer. A Ukrainian farmer. I've actually seen footage similar to this a couple of years back as well. Shared it with you. We've got a farmer. In fact, there's quite a few vehicles operating here, trying desperately to harvest the crops while the crops are burning due to the war. So you can see there are 3 vehicles crisscrossing here. They are desperately just getting as much as they can, chopped down and picked up before the fires envelop these fields. This is not only these people's livelihoods, but it is absolutely vital for the world food supply, really. It feeds into the local economy, but also the food supply in general. You can see there, it looks like they might have actually got away with harvesting enough so that the fire doesn't spread. But that fire is right next to the vehicle as he's operating his harvester. Incredible stuff there. The price Ukraine pays for bread. Earlier, Ukraine has proudly been named the breadbasket of Europe, not so much anymore. And the number of fires in the Kherson region has multiplied due to Russian constant shelling, and they do that on purpose as well. I've reported this last year where they were starting off fires in fields like this and down in the Zaporizhia region. It's like if we can't have it, you can't have it either type thing. Right, situation is desperate. Gazprom does not know what to do with 60 billion cubic meters of unsold gas. Previously, we've seen Gazprom burn off gas at the kind of extraction point because they can't do anything with it, and you can't stop it coming. Like, it's too difficult to cap it off. So you need this constant demand for the gas in order to keep it flowing, and goes into storage and it comes out of storage and so on and so forth. It's a constant flow, and if you don't have the demand, then it's very difficult to know what to do with it. So they end up burning it off, and now they're saying we don't know what to do with 60 billion cubic meters of unsold gas. They're just sitting around with all this gas because of sanctions and so on and so forth, and that will of course hurt them big time in the pocket. Now here I don't know what's going on here, whether this is anything to do with the war, but we have on the waters of the Sea of Japan near Vladivostok, the ship Merlion caught fire and exploded. I mean, absolutely fundamentally exploded there. I don't know what this ship what it's doing, but anyway, and whether it has anything. I don't know, it looks like it's a Russian company ship. It's a tourist ship. Does touristic trips close to the coast. They've already blamed Azerbaijan for a terrorist attack. The ship was empty when it exploded. They've been caught using civilian ships that are modified to look for undersea cables. I'm not saying that that's the case here. As far as I can check online, the boat is a catamaran, quite small and not good for long travels. And it is in Vladivostok. Unless they are trying to attack China or Japan, it is not a threat for the EU. But interesting, what makes a catamaran explode so massively like that? Quite incredible. Right, Poland. Now, I play a bit of World of Tanks. I did so last night, actually, a bit naughty, far too long. I had things to do, and I didn't do them, and I just had some downtime. We are in danger of gamifying war. In terms of when we look at statistics and we look at maps, you kind of almost treat it like a big war game and forget that these are people's lives who are these lives are taken forever. They are lost because of the decisions of a narcissistic genocidal dictator. And we must remember that this is serious and sad, horrific even. But then you look at something like this, and you think, I'd like to do that. And then the little boy inside you, sounds a bit weird, speaks to this, and then you're like, oh, don't I gamify war? But that's what happens. So there's World of Tanks paintball on another level. This is in Poland. And I think that just looks pretty cool. So if you're in Poland, go and check that out. Have a bit of a paintball action, but instead of running around, I could do that because I can't run. I can barely walk these days. So that suits me just fine. Thank you very much. Okay, now the reason I'm a bit late today is I spent a lot of time watching Glastonbury on BBC iPlayer and looking for Ukrainian flags in the audience. I only saw Ukraine. There were previous Glastonburys where it's been much more in people's mind's eyes. There have been lots of Ukrainian flags. I only saw a Ukrainian flag when I was watching Supergrass. I didn't see any others. But here we've got Imagine Dragons. I really should buy some Imagine Dragons CDs, old school, right? Because these guys consistently support Ukraine. And I don't know what connection to Ukraine they have. But he does this. He does this a lot. They won't allow Ukrainian flags in Hungary when they play. And he's always supportive of Ukraine. That when they won't allow flags at their gig in Hungary, they just put loads of blue and yellow confetti out into the audience. And so let's support Imagine Dragons. Let's support people who support Ukraine. Awesome stuff. Anyway, thank you for watching. I really appreciate your support. Spare a thought for all the people affected in Ukraine from the horrific attacks last night. Although we are yet to see any massive, it was the biggest attack, but we're yet to see like widespread damage. So that's good news, but it could mean that actually instead of, you have this odd tension where you're like, this sounds what I'm going to say sounds horrible, but from a purely military point of view, when you see like civilian buildings hit, that is militarily better, than I think when you're like, oh, not so many civilian buildings hit. So for example, last night, there's very little footage coming out of, say, apartment blocks getting blown up. Now, that's horrific from a human point of view and the deaths of these civilians. So I'm not saying this from a kind of human moral point of view, but from a purely militarily strategic point of view. Like when you have nights with 41 drones getting through and a whole heap of missiles getting through and you're not seeing a lot of damage, that probably means that Russia has hit some critical military installations and targets. And that's a problem for Ukraine's war effort, more so than if you see, a house getting blown up or a farm, warehouse or whatever it is. As horrible as that is, I'm looking at this from a very, lacking emotion point of view, just from a hard military fact kind of view. So I do worry that the Russians might well have hit some critical targets last night. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.